Thank you, everybody. Is my mic on? Yes, it's working? Okay, good. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about why whales are weird, and I actually changed my first slide on purpose after seeing the lovely video that you all saw this morning and yesterday, because, in fact, these whales look a lot like those little black and white stripes that you're all seeing. You're going to see a lot of this in our pictures, because whales are really amazing animals, and those things you're looking at there are actually the throat pleats of the whale. But what I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about why whales are weird. Now, what is that doing at a conference on resilience? I don't know. I was just asked to talk about whales. But what I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about the story of evolution, and I'm going to use whales as a model for that. Evolution is the process that mediates resilience, or you could say survival, for a species, and whales are our model for this. Now, evolution is not directed, which means that the species doesn't decide what direction it's going to go into and then change into that form. But in fact, they really just respond to their habitat. So selection is acting on random mutations, which confer survival advantage. So if you go back in time to the earliest mammals that became whales, you're looking at an animal that looks kind of like a deer, this one over here. And I want to point out this reconstruction over here of what that deer actually looked like was done by an Icelandic artist. So I'm totally in the theme here, John Baldur Hilberg. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. That's that one of those D's with the little cross on top, which I couldn't put in my font. I don't have that font. But anyway, that's what these things looked like. They were little tiny deer. They were herbivores. And how do we get from an herbivore to something that looks kind of like an alligator is a nice and interesting story. It started out by these animals exploring the water's edge. And they became muskrat-like kind of animals. So they swam around in the water, and they ate not only the grasses, but probably the things living in the grasses, like little bugs and little fish. And so their teeth changed from being deer-like herbivores to carnivores, having dog-like kind of teeth. And eventually, these animals changed as they explored another part of the habitat, and they became alligator-like animals that would lunge up at prey on the shore using these powerful hind legs. But they could also swim with those legs because they were webbed, and they're kind of like seal feet. But they had an up and down movement to their swimming because their tail was much more like an otter and much less like an alligator. So instead of that side-to-side movement, they had the up and down movement, which is the same vertebral movement that you have in your spine as a galloping animal on the land. So they kept that. And eventually, these animals decided to go for a more pelagic existence in the ocean and left the shores completely, so they didn't need hind legs anymore. So those hind legs became these tiny little nubbins that you see over here. Now, whales are mammals, so they drag with them their whole evolutionary history of having been land mammals. So whales actually, and by the way, the term whales includes dolphins and porpoises. Whales are placental mammals. They have a placental pregnancy. They give live birth, as you can see here. There's the tail emerging. There's the animals twisting to break the umbilical cord. And this is an older calf, but you notice that they're nursing. They nurse from teats that are actually buried inside the body and are only extruded during nursing, because these animals keep all of their genitalia inside so that they're very streamlined. This presents a big problem for living underwater because you don't want to lose all the milk to the outside. If you're an animal that doesn't have lips or cheeks, how do you actually nurse? Well, they have an amazing tongue, which can actually form a tube like a straw. And the end of the tongue has little finger-like projections that helps to hold onto the teat, and therefore the milk is not lost. Now, if we track the evolution of whales, we see that the front legs have become flippers and the hind legs have pretty much disappeared. This is what you would see in a modern-day whale. You notice that this is the front flipper over here, and I actually wanted to bring some things to show you, and I'm sorry I told all this PopTech people to help me out. They scoured the countryside looking for bones and baleen and stuff for me to bring here, but every museum that they went to said, well, I'm sorry, it's part of our collection. We can't really take it off the skeleton. I would have brought my own, but customs doesn't allow me to bring whale parts across country borders, so had a little problem with that. But normally I would have brought stuff here and showed a little show and tell instead of these pictures. But let me show you what a flipper looks like. So here's the flipper of a whale, and inside the flipper of a whale are all the same bones that you have in your arm, that a cat has in its paw, that a bat has in its wing. This is the humerus, or the arm bone. These are the radius and ulna, or the forearm bones. These are the wrist bones, and here are the 5 fingers. Just like a hand. So the entire upper extremity is contained in that flipper. So it's basically alluding back to its evolutionary past. If you look at the area of the pelvis, there's a little tiny bone. Well, I've enlarged it here, but there's a tiny bone that's just a little remnant of a vestigial pelvis. And every once in a while you get a whale that has little legs emerging just by accident because it's in the genetic coding for these animals to have the ability to make legs, but that's usually suppressed. They don't need a pelvis anymore because they're not weight-bearing. They're not actually standing on hind legs, but you still see the vestige of it. If you look at how they swim, though, it's not by using hind legs like a seal might do. What it does instead is it uses that spinal movement of galloping, but in the water. So if you extend that movement all the way to the end, you have a tail at the end. But unlike seals, there's no feet here. These are not full of bones. This is an X-ray of the end of the tail. You just see the end of the vertebral column here, and these are blood vessels coming out. But the tail is in a horizontal position, so they paddle up and down, not side to side, the way a shark tail here works. So very different from fish. Even though they look like fish, they don't act like fish. Another form that is very interesting is the dorsal fin. This is the dorsal fin of a whale. There's a dorsal fin of a dolphin. It's a form that we emulate in today's designs on airplanes. There's that same dorsal fin on the airplane, which keeps the airplane from doing roll or yaw. By the way, this is pitch. Okay, so it does allow pitch, but it doesn't allow roll and yaw, and that's actually very useful even on sailboats. If you look at the keel of a sailboat, it's remarkably like the dorsal fin of a whale. It's just on the other side, but it does the same thing. Oops, I went too fast. This is what a dorsal fin looks like. There's no bones in the dorsal fin, but it's full of blood vessels, and that's important because the whales are mammals, and mammals therefore are regulating their temperature. If they get too hot, they throw all the blood up into these blood vessels and they radiate the heat out. If they are not too hot, they're too cold, they actually shut down those blood vessels and they conserve the heat, and they're wrapped in a blubber thermos. So all of this is the sperm whale, by the way. This is us filming Inside Nature's Giants episodes if you want to watch. I'm somewhere buried in here. But this is the blubber coming off, and it's a very thick layer of blubber, and that is like a thermos wrapper. That keeps the whale warm. But it also provides other advantages. It gives the whale buoyancy. Remember, the whales, they don't have fur. Polar bears get their buoyancy from the fur that traps air. And it also stays warm. But these animals, if they had that much fur, they would have drag. So they got rid of the fur and instead have blubber. And the blubber confers the same buoyancy. But it also provides energy for migrating. A lot of these whales migrate half a planet. So if you look at some of the really big baleen whales, they're going to feed up in the polar areas, or down in the polar areas if you're near Antarctica, and they come to the equator for calving. So during that migration of half a planet, these animals are only feeding during a small part of that migration. The rest of the time, they're starving. So if they have to carry a pregnancy on their way south, they have to feed that calf that's inside. And if they have to then give birth to the calf in the tropical waters and then go back to the polar regions with a calf in tow that they're nursing, they have to carry with them all the energy stores that they're going to need for practically a whole year. So that's why female whales, and this is very unusual, female whales are actually bigger than male whales in many of the species. That's mostly true in the baleen whales. You don't see that very often in the animal world. Whales, like all mammals, have hair. This is the top of a gray whale's head, and each of those red arrows indicates a hair on the top of the head that helps it to feel the water streaming past it, and it also helps it to feel the ground when it turns sideways to feed off of the things on the ocean floor. The toothed whales actually have hair too. They have whiskers along the side of their mouth, which is different from the baleen that you'll see in the baleen whales in a moment. Which brings me to the point that whales actually diverged into two groups. The toothed whales, shown here, are the odontoceti. They have teeth. They use them for catching fish. That's a porpoise, that's a dolphin, that's a beluga whale, that's a false killer whale. There's a true killer whale, and obviously they don't only eat fish, these animals also eat mammals in the case of the killer whales. And then the baleen whales, which are the other group, also called the mystaceti, which literally means the mustached whales. And if you look at these incredible pictures taken of these whales feeding underwater, you can actually see the mustache of the whale right there. But that mustache is not actually whiskers. It's actually derived from the inside of the hard palate area that's come down, and it's a material that's a lot like your fingernails. It's keratin. The baleen whales, in turn, are actually divided into two groups. Those that strain the water, that constantly goes through their mouth as they swim forward, and strains through the baleen plates, which are here, and the gulpers, which just take in this huge amount of water into their mouth. And notice there's those black and white stripes again. It's like a theme now. So there they are, gulping in this huge amount. And then what they're going to do is squeeze from the bottom with their tongue, pushing all of this water out through the baleen, through these slats in here. And the brushy part here, which is on the inside of the baleen, this is the outside, this is the upper jaw. The brushy part is like a mustache. So if you drink something with a good thick head on it, like a nice beer, and you drink it and it gets stuck in your mustache, then you have to lick it off with your tongue. That's how these guys eat. So what they're licking off from their baleen are the little fish and the little krill that get caught in the water. Now, I like to refer to this as my toilet bowl series. This is what a whale looks like when it's feeding. It looks like a giant toilet bowl. So it's grabbed all of the fish inside this water that's in this pouch of its throat. It looks kind of like a pelican with that distended pouch. But then the problem is closing the mouth, because you can't lift that lower jaw back up to the head. So what the whale does instead is it swims its head over its mouth. So the mouth stays still, and then the rest of the body powers over the top, and you close the toilet seat lid. And then once you do that, you can now push with the tongue, and you see the water streaming out like fountains in between all the baleen plates. It's pretty amazing to watch. And what are they feeding? The biggest animals in the world are feeding on the tiniest animals in the world. Little fish like sand lance, krill, which look like shrimp, and these things that look like bugs, amphipods and copepods. That's mostly what makes up a whale's diet. Unless you're a killer whale, then you're eating bigger things like porpoises and seals and stuff. But whales are carnivores. But interestingly, they retain that evolutionary past of a deer-like animal. They have a multi-chambered stomach like all herbivores do. They're just not processing herbivorous material anymore. They're actually eating meat. Now, another big myth about whales, they don't spout water. It may look like they're spouting water. That's the front of the whale. That's its nose over here. But if you look closely, you can see the water streaming down the back of the whale. So most of the water that got sort of caught in that pocket of the nose is being blown out of the way as they breathe pretty explosively, the way we sneeze. But mostly what's happening is as this air is coming out in this high-pressure situation of being forced out like a sneeze, and you've seen people sneeze, those droplets everywhere, right? As you go from this high pressure forcing out to a low pressure atmosphere, the water in the vapor condenses and you get droplets, so it looks like they're breathing water. If you look at the top of their head, they have a closable nose. These are the two nostrils. Here it's partly open, and here it's completely open. Looks like a human nose just stuck backwards on the back of the head there. And if you look at toothed whales, they also have a nose on the top of their head. Here it's closed, here it's open. That's what a toothed whale has. And it shows the evolutionary history of going from nostrils in the front of the head to the middle of the head to the back of the head. That allows these animals to skim the surface of the water for a very brief moment, be near the surface and breathe, and then continue their motion of swimming without the wasted energy of having to lift their head out of the water, take a breath, and then put their head back in the water again. The actual configuration on the inside is quite interesting because it allows these animals to separate the breathing and the swallowing pathways. It's like a built-in snorkel. So air is coming in here on green. Blue indicates food going around this interlock of the larynx or voice box, which is this structure here, and that's the organ that we study because we're interested in how these animals make sound. That farting noise is echolocation. The whistling noise is communication, along with a visual signal because the animals are releasing bubbles here. And when it turns, you're going to hear the echolocation. Pretty cool stuff. So what's happening is inside that whale's head is a structure in here, which is basically your upper lip turned backwards like this over your nose. That's all it is. It's just an upper lip turned backward, and it goes like this. So it's like, you know, Bronx cheer, raspberry, but doing it like this against the top of the nose. And that's how they make the sounds, which goes through this fatty structure, which is derived from your upper lip, which is like a big focusing lens, and that's how echolocation sounds come out. Communication sounds we're not sure of. They may be generated here in the larynx, and they come out in this direction most likely. If you look at a sperm whale, this is a CT reconstruction of a sperm whale's head. This is the most amazing nose in the animal world because the sperm whale, about a third of its body is its head, and about 3/4 of the head is its nose. This is the biggest nose in the whole world. The air comes up this way. It goes to the whole front of the head, where it then goes through the lips up there, and then it goes to the back of the head through the spermaceti sac. It reflects off a parabolic mirror of air in the back of the head. Then it comes down through this area of condensing filters before it finally comes out. And it makes us sound like castanets. So that brings us to, we've talked about echolocation, but what about singing whales? Well, whales do sing. We've all heard humpback whales. And our studies have shown that the sounds are actually not emanating from the blowhole area, but from the throat area of the whale. Now what these guys are doing are making low frequency sounds from a larynx that has a sac attached to it down here. And it's the sac that's actually acting like the amplifier or the transducer and creating the vibrations into the water. And if they do it in a pulsatile fashion, that could also serve as echolocation too, making a very coarse echolocation. For those who are wondering how I get to do the research I do, well, we don't do whaling in the US, but we do have access to whales that die for other reasons. Sometimes they're hit by ships. That's me. This is a 65-foot fin whale. That's my scalpel. That's what I'm trying to get out. I'm standing on the jaw right there. I'm trying to get the larynx out of that whale. When it's out, it looks like this. I finally get to play with the trucks and the heavy equipment. My kindergarten teacher wouldn't let me play with the trucks. He said, no, you have to play with dolls. I said, oh, one day I'm going to show you. I'm going to play with the trucks. So this is, it's a bit difficult to get some of this stuff back to the laboratory to work on. That's one of the problems of working with large animals. Most people can store their life's work in the space I store one specimen. But the larynx is a huge, huge structure. In fact, if you had a larynx that was proportionally like a whale's, you wouldn't be able to fit it in your body because the larynx is about the same size as a lung. We don't have enough neck space to hold the larynx that big. And whales don't even have a neck, so you can imagine why a third of their body is their head, because they have to accommodate this enormous larynx. And the lungs are actually pretty amazing too, because the lungs are adapted for diving. So these lungs can completely collapse at depth and then pop back open again. If that happened to us at depth, they wouldn't pop back open because the inner surfaces of the alveoli, where the gas exchange occurs, would stick. They would collapse and stick. But these animals have the ability to pop them open again. They also have the ability to change their rib cage to accommodate for that shrinking volume at depth of gases. So the ribs actually hinge and fold up. And in addition, they have a lot of myoglobin in their muscle, which is why their muscle looks very black. And that allows them to hold so much oxygen that they can breath hold, in the case of sperm whales, for up to about an hour. Now, what's happening in terms of the sacs on the outside of the head? Now, if we went diving to the depth that these guys go, our skull would actually crack because we have sinuses in our head, and under pressure, those would crack. But these sinuses are outside the skull, and they allow the animals to make sounds without losing air. I'm going to try a little experiment. I want you to all hum. Okay, now do it like a whale. You don't want to lose that air coming out of your nose. So close your nose, okay? What happened? You pressurized the system. You have no place for the air to go anymore, so the airflow stops. If you had a balloon on the end of your nose, like these guys do, you'd continue to allow that air to flow. And therefore, you'd still be able to make sound. And to boot, you'd capture the sound, you'd capture the air and be able to send it back again, recycling it so you could use it again. Because air is a precious commodity underwater. Now, no talk on whales would be complete without talking about their behavior and their superintelligence. These are brains from various dolphins and killer whales. They're not only huge. Whales have the biggest brains of any animal in the world because they're big animals. But they also have one of the most complex brains, really indicated by the amount of folding that you see on here. And play is an indication of how smart an animal is. And whales do play. Here are some beluga whales playing with water, for example, showing off to the photographer. These are wild animals, by the way, that are playing. In addition to interacting with humans, they interact with other whales. They're one of the few species that does interspecies play. And these are not even the same animal. This happened more than once in different animals. And it's not just the dolphins who decided to go whale sliding. And that's what they call it, or whale surfing. The whales actually get a kick out of doing it too, and it's very gentle. It's not aggressive. They will lift them again and again and carry them around. It's like piggyback rides for kids, and they have a great time playing with each other, and that's a very unusual situation. They also have learned to use the tools that are around them. They don't have opposable thumbs. There's a big problem with that. But they can use air, for example, as a tool. So these animals can make smoke screens of air. They use it for aggressive displays. They can make camouflage. If you're a killer whale chasing one of these whales, you won't be able to echolocate through that. So it's an acoustic barrier, kind of like a James Bond smoke screen. And it's also used for prey capture. And you may have seen these pictures of humpback whales making these bubble rings, which they then come through the middle of, flashing their white flippers, herding the fish together, and they catch all the fish in the middle of the ring. Dolphins do the exact same thing, only instead of using air, they're paddling the ground and they're stirring up mud and make these mud rings, and then they're able to catch the fish as the fish try to escape and jump out of the mud ring. So it's a very clever way of using the environment as a tool. They also pick other tools out of the environment. This is the dolphin equivalent of a glove over its nose, and we'll use that to poke into the coral reefs and chase fish out. These animals are using the shore as a barrier. They're chasing fish up on the shore and then grabbing the fish, and sometimes they don't get all of the fish. And then they've also had to learn to adapt to a changing environment. So we all know about the sea ice changes. This is a problem for the whales that hunt seals, like killer whales, because this gives the seals lots more platforms where they can escape from the whale. So the whales have learned to accommodate for that. And here you see a whale giving a signal to this group. There's the baby in the group. And watch what happens. These guys are all swimming in formation. And they've made a wave. They've learned how to knock the seal off the ice by making a wave and cooperatively hunting. Now there's resilience for you, look. If you watch this video, and I encourage you to do it, there are about 15 attempts on that video. It's not that the killer whales are bad at catching the seal. They purposely don't kill the seal because they're trying to train that baby how to hunt. So this is all about learning, and this session is on learning as well as adaptation. So we've talked about adaptation. This is the learning part. So these animals are training their baby on how to hunt over and over and over again until it gets it right. Humans and dolphins have also learned to cooperate with each other. These whales are giving a signal to these fishermen saying, we're ready for you to throw the nets. And so the fishermen are able to fish because the dolphins actually herd the fish to the nets. And in the process, the nets form the barrier, so the dolphins are able to catch some of the fish at the same time because the fish can't escape. Now, resilience, from my perspective as a biologist, for a species is at a cost. It's at the cost of the death of individuals that are unfit for the environment. And this is a fin whale lying on its back. And again, there are those beautiful lines, those landscape lines that we saw. Strandings happen. You've heard about strandings of pilot whales or of dolphins. And the question comes, what's our role as humans in this situation? Should we be interfering with a natural phenomenon that is helping a species adapt and change and evolve by getting rid of the weaker individuals? When should we interfere if we do interfere? Should we interfere when the strandings are for unnatural causes, such as mortality is caused by toxins that we've put in the environment or military sonar? What about entanglement in fishing gear? That's certainly something we put in the water. Should it be our responsibility to cut the lines from these whales before they end up like this one, dead on the beach? What about ship strikes? This is where I get most of my specimens, actually, are whales that are struck by ships. There you can see the slice on the whale, or the propeller slices through a whale. But this is actually a learning thing for the whales, because those whales that do manage to survive with injuries that are somewhat severe but not life-threatening, these guys have learned to avoid the ships now. So maybe there's a good aspect to that. But what about dry fisheries? In the case of dry fisheries, where the entire pod is actually herded into a cove, some of you may have seen the movie The Cove, and is slaughtered, there is no learning curve. There's no cultural memory. It's not like those shrines that we heard about yesterday where people know where to retreat when the tsunami comes. This is a problem because if the entire pod is killed, there's nobody to survive and tell the story. So the next pod that swims through the area doesn't know this is a dangerous cove, and they suffer the same fate. What about research whaling, where babies are taken as well as adults? There's no next generation that's observed what happened that can learn and then pass on the information that these are ships to avoid. And in fact, selection is now even occurring in our own time frame. If you look at blue whales used to be around the range of 3 school buses long. That's about 33 meters. You don't see blue whales that size anymore. They're almost all entirely been whaled out of the population. But a new subspecies of blue whales has been discovered called the pygmy blue whale. They don't get much bigger than 24 meters. And some people argue that this is a result of artificial selection. The whalers have taken out the big ones, leaving only the small ones who were able to mature at a smaller size, creating a new subspecies. So perhaps that's the adaptation solution to the pressure of whaling. Here's an interesting story. You may have heard about the 3 gray whales that were trapped in Alaska in the sea ice. And they were rescued by Inuit whale hunters. I mean, think of the irony of that. And an international team, including a Soviet icebreaker that came through. And it inspired a movie called Big Miracle. Well, maybe we were the cause of the problem to begin with, because these same hunters that were actually rescuing the gray whales also hunt the bowhead whale. They don't hunt the gray whale because the gray whale is protected, but the bowhead whale they have a permit for. But bowhead whales have a very important function in the Arctic. They break up the sea ice. Without enough bowhead whales, gray whales and other whales get trapped in the sea ice. So we may have created that problem for those gray whales. Maybe we should have been interfering. But the happy story of resilience is that gray whales, because they had been protected from hunting, are actually the only whale that's come off the endangered species list. So we're very proud of that. And I just want to close by saying that the time frame for resilience of a species is very hard to judge with these animals because it's marked in lifetimes. It's easy with bacteria. You can, in a matter of a day or two, you can see a bacteria change and even develop a resistance to drugs. But in the case of whales, their lifetime can be 150 to 200 years. Some of these whales live a very long time. So it'll take a long time for us to know the real effects of whaling and other activities that we're doing on the ocean. These are the canaries in the coal mine for us, but it's going to take a long time for us to see what our effects are on these animals. And I just want to close with a few quotes that were said yesterday that I think are entirely applicable to the situation of evolution and resilience. It's about survive, adapt, and grow in the face of change, which Judith said yesterday, or to recover, thrive, persist amid disruption, which Andrew said yesterday. And that's exactly what's happening with the whales. Thank you very much.